Hello, welcome to Miniature Realms. My name's Stuart. One of the most frequently asked questions I get in my videos, of which mostly painting, are what paint should I use for this? And I think that's quite an interesting topic, what paint, and I'm going to explore that a little bit in this video.
Miniature Realms is proudly sponsored by Counter-Attack Bases. They stock a wide range of counters, gaming aids and movement trays for multiple game systems and offer custom items to suit your club or even your podcast or YouTube channel. Make sure you check out their old world compatible range. It's expanding all the time. New ranges are being added soon. Look at these fantastic generals tokens to help those of you who are forgetful remember in-game effects and spells and things like that. And look at these old world legacy army token sets as well. Again, more of these are being added all the time and very nice they are. Check out the link in the video description.
Now, maybe you're a regular viewer of the channel, maybe you're not, and you've come across this video because of the topic and it's piqued your interest. A lot of the videos I do on the channel, not all, but probably 60, 70, maybe even more % of the videos are to do with painting. That's what I do. That's what I class as my day job, painting for other people and also painting for this channel. So that tends to be where my content leads. And when I do a painting video, I nearly always show which paint I'm using for a particular stage, and I still get questions about it, which is great. I want those kind of conversations in the comments, but it doesn't really tell the story always of why I've chosen a particular paint. And I've been thinking about it recently and I decided to make a fun video to talk about why I choose a particular paint or a paint range. Number one is pure and simple. It's from recommendation, and that may well be from watching other artists on their videos, talking to my friends who are painters or hobbyists about the paints they're using and what they've enjoyed and what they've liked. And then also, now I've been around for a little while as a YouTuber, I also get sent things, and maybe I try things that I wouldn't normally try and find that I really like them. And I always try to be honest in my reviews, and I will say what I like and what I don't like. But you'll notice the things I really like because I'll be using them again and again in my videos, and I'm very happy to recommend things myself when I know they're good and I'm happy with them. I'm pretty sure we all function in the same way as well, whether that's the first time you walk into a hobby store and you're recommended that basic starter set, and if, like many people, it's a Games Workshop and you pick up a few Citadel paints, or maybe it's a more modern day that you've started your hobbying and you're in an independent store and you're handed a box of Army Painter starter set, that kind of thing. You're still being recommended something to set you along that way, and that just evolves and changes over time, and recommendation is always going to be one of the better ways of finding out what you should try out for that first time. Number two for me is quality, and again that seems pretty obvious, but it comes after that recommendation stage. You try it, you like it, it does what it's supposed to do. If it doesn't work and it's no good, or it doesn't do quite as well as you hope it would, and you know there are other alternatives, you're likely not to use it. And it's exactly the same for me. It's got to meet certain standards that match the way I paint, and that's really important. So there's different qualities. We all grade things ourselves, and things have their own aesthetic qualities. Some painters will like things that work in a particular way or a particular color. Other painters will prefer other things. So there's no right or wrong answer for most paint ranges. A lot of it is to suit your own style and your own budget, and all the other things we'll come on to in a little while. I think we live in a bit of a golden age of wargaming at the moment. There's so many new hobby tools and products coming out all the time, and that includes paint ranges. And I actually go as far as to say I don't think there are any really bad paint ranges out there. There's been improvements to many existing ranges from different companies over the last few years. I think everything's got something to offer. There may well be a certain color that I don't like from a particular range. I don't tend to like Games Workshop whites, find them a bit chalky. That's just one example, but it doesn't mean that the whole range is bad, and I will find things in nearly all of the major ranges that I like that I'll have on my shelves to use for hobby products. On a personal level, I look for paints with strong, bold pigments and colors, but that can also be thinned well with just water at times and don't break up, and are quite robust and are good for feathering and for layering, and that you can turn into glazes. If you can do all of those things, I think they've got pretty good properties. And another thing I really look for is consistency across the range, and I think that's important too. Every range is allowed their one or two bad colours, the aforementioned white ranges from the Citadel, but I think on the whole, if I pick up a paint, I like to know when I shake it and squeeze a bit onto my palette that it's going to be a similar viscosity to the last colour I used from that range, and we're not going to have those weird mixes that we used to have back in the days of the old school Citadel where your oranges would just never cover. I think we've moved again past that now with a lot of ranges. The quality overall is much better, but it's definitely something I look for with the quality. Quality of the packaging does come into it as well, but I do give a lot of paint ranges a little bit of leeway when it comes to that, maybe more than I should. There's lots of talk always about Citadel paints and them drying out and whether that is deliberate. I'm not sure I buy that. I think they've just gone with a design and it takes a long time before they move on and change it. But there are no perfect paint pots out there. I can't think of any range that doesn't have some kind of drying around the top. One of my favorites at the moment, Too Thin Coats, isn't great with it, to be honest with you. When you shake those paints, they're great, they put an agitator, but it always dribbles a bit of paint out the top and you end up with very messy caps. And I hope at some point in the future they will redesign those bottles, or at least the caps. I think Army Painter are generally quite good, and the AK range are generally quite good for squeezer bottles. Again, some of the cleanest. And Pro Acryl, very good. Their design is about the best mix overall. You still have a little bit of leak, but it's a lot easier to close that cap and wipe it out the way. But ultimately, if I really love the paint range, I will struggle with the pots that they are provided in. There's not enough to put me off, and that's why Too Thin Coats at the moment are one of my favorites, because of the consistency across the range and the way they work. Every single pot that I open up is pretty good. Now, this isn't an advert for Too Thin Coats. If you follow the channel, you know I use them an awful lot, but it's one of the reasons I really like them, is because the quality is good and they're consistent. I think it's almost 9 out of 10 for that. They do get dragged down a little bit for their bottle design. They're definitely not good. They're probably more like a 5 out of 10. Number 3 is ease of use, and some of that could easily be bundled in with quality. But I didn't want to do that because that doesn't always detract from the quality. There are some ranges out there that are really fantastic that aren't super easy to use for all jobs, which means they're maybe not as flexible and maybe not as easy to use for beginners. So Scale 75 scale color range was something that I used an awful lot for many years, and I think they are fantastic, aside from the fact that you can't get hold of them all at the moment all the time, and we'll come back to that a little bit later. But they're not as easy to use. They're super ultra matte, and the pigment separates from the gel very easily. So you need lots of shaking, lots of agitators in those bottles just to get them to come out on the palette sometimes. And then the way they behave is a little bit harder for people that are maybe started with using Citadel paints. They're not quite as easy out of the pot and take a little bit more advanced techniques sometimes. Don't get me wrong, they are brilliant for glazes, they're brilliant for feathering, they're brilliant for blending, but they're not as easy to use as some of those other paints. Like I mentioned with Too Thin Coats, it's a little bit easier to use out the pot for a newer painter. So you've got to bear those things in mind when you're choosing your paint range as well. Number 4 is depth of range. Now, in many ways, that really shouldn't matter. If I find a particular paint or product that I really like and works for me, I don't need to buy stuff from the rest of their range as long as that paint works with the existing stuff I like. I can mix and match and it shouldn't matter. And it really doesn't. And some of that might be a psychological thing personal to me, but I do like to find 1 or 2 core ranges that I buy a lot from. Partly it's because I know I can trust it, and it's that consistency thing again. I know the paints are going to work in a certain way, I can trust them, and I feel safe buying a product from that range. So if they've got a big wide range that covers a lot of things that I need, I'm going to be more attracted to it than some of the others. And that might be harsh on a new startup, I suppose, that are bringing out a new range and they've only got a few to start with. And maybe I tend to not hop on to Kickstarters for those new paints and those new companies straight away, because I want to be able to have a full range to start with, or at least have the opportunity to buy that. So that's a personal thing maybe to me, and you should definitely go your own way with that and not copy exactly what I do. But by having a big range, it does tend to show you that this company's around to stay. And it does mean that you can invest in paint schemes and make notes in your little diaries and build armies that maybe you take time to paint over a number of years, knowing that that paint will hopefully still be around in a few years' time when you want to go back and add a new unit. That's not always the case, and we'll get on to the availability very, very soon in the next point. But on the whole, it does give you a little bit more confidence. It definitely gives me a little bit more confidence that companies that have a big range of paints are going to make them for a long time because they've put a lot of investment into them, and they should be easier to get hold of as well. There's also plenty of nuance to what range really means. Companies like Vallejo and AK have vast ranges of acrylic paints, but they also have vast ranges of oil paints and basing materials that go way beyond a few tufts and a pot of sterling mud. They have lots of advanced military modelling style things, enamels and loads of effects, and they become ranges within themselves. And I could say, because I use a lot of those things, maybe it'd be better to pick everything from the one company and use all of their acrylic paints as well. And I do use elements of them. But when they have that much, I also feel fairly secure, like I've already mentioned, that those ranges are going to be around for a few years and you can return and find the same stuff. There are some colour changes over the years. Vallejo are very famous for that with some of their paints, but a lot of their basing stuff tends to be fairly consistent. So I will happily return and use vast ranges of military modelling style basing effects and enamels and oils from one company and go and use the vast amount of acrylics maybe from another. So there is nuance there. There's not one given rule, and you should be aware of all of those and really shop around and see what's there in the market. Number 5 is availability, and if you follow the channel and listen to a lot of my painting tutorials, you've have heard me bemoan not being able to get certain colours that I got used to for many years, and maybe that's an example of how even ranges that I chose because they were large still can after a few years start to become less available and harder to get hold of. So availability is becoming more and more important to me, and I guess there's no way of seeing in the future, but I'm definitely careful about what I choose in the short term. One of the things is because I commission paint and because I paint a lot of armies and I paint for the channel, I don't tend to use Kickstarters for paint ranges, because if I find a paint I want and I love it and I use it all, I want to be able to order it and even maybe get it next day. I quite often use suppliers for my paints that I might not use for my miniatures because I know that if I can order it and I need it that next day, it's not going to be holding up a project. So if it's something that's always a nightmare to get hold of, I'll very rarely stick with it and move to maybe even sometimes a slightly lesser product if I know I can get hold of it consistently. I'll give you a couple of recent examples of availability and where it affects my paint choice. One is to do with Two Thin Coats range. They very kindly sent me some of their Wave 3 recently, but I didn't go in for their Kickstarter, and I've bought now all of their first ranges, the Wave 1, the Wave 2, Wave 3, because I like them that much. But I didn't go in for the Kickstarter for the reasons I've just given. I want to be able to buy a pot on the shelf when I need it. And as much as it would be really exciting to receive all those new colours, I'm going to wait till they hit the street and I can buy them. And if I like them, I can keep buying them again. So that's one of my rules. I may break it in the future, but at the moment, I don't buy paints on Kickstarter for that reason. The other example I'll give will be another paint range I've mentioned a lot in this video is Scale 75, a scale colour. I really enjoyed their paints, but most of all, I really love their metal and alchemy range. I thought they were fantastic, and there were a few go-to paints. And if you go back through my videos, I've been holding their paints up in front of camera for years now saying, I love this paint. The problem is they're becoming harder and harder to get hold of. So I'm looking at other paint ranges to fill those gaps now, which is a real shame. But I feel I'm at the point now where it's been so many months now since I've last been able to buy a Necro Gold when I wanted to, or really hard to get a decayed metal. And it's just a shame. The paints that I really liked, but I'm finding alternatives now. And again, sometimes not quite as good. The Two Thin Coats range, as much as I love it, their metallics aren't as good. They are lovely in terms of their range of colour, but they're not as smooth, and I really like a smooth metallic. So I started using them for certain jobs and to fill certain gaps. And I've been able to do that colour-wise, but I'm not 100% happy. So I go on the hunt for more things. And recently I've been playing around with a lot of Pro Acryl metallics, and they really do seem to be fantastic. And that might be my new go-to for metallics. But again, they don't have a wide enough range just yet. They're growing as a company and the availability seems very good at this stage. So the future looks bright, but the future needs more golds, the future needs a couple more silvers, and definitely a couple more bronzes as well in that metallics range they have. So I'm hoping that's something we'll see more in the future. But again, all things to think about when you're choosing your paint ranges. Another area where availability is really important is because of me as a YouTuber. I'm recommending paints. So I like to recommend things that you guys can get hold of. And whether you live in Brisbane, whether you live in Chicago, whether you live in the UK or in mainland Europe, there's different ranges you can get hold of. So I like to recommend things that you can either have a good chance of getting hold of, or at the very, very least, you can find a good alternative, something that matches up. It's really important to find things that people can find a pot of and use. Citadel is always a really good go-to because Games Workshop just get that product everywhere. And that's another reason why I'm using Too Thin Coats. Not only does it have a fairly good coverage range around the world in terms of where you can pick it up, also they are excellent in terms of their compatibility with the Citadel range. There's color conversion charts out there put out by themselves. So you can say, use this paint. If you can't get hold of this one, it matches almost exactly with this Citadel version. And I think Army Painter, which I don't use very much of at all, would be a good example of a range that has pretty good worldwide availability and pretty good compatibility or cross-referenceability with other color ranges because it's so large as well. Number 6, and the final point really, is price. And many people might put that towards the top. And the reason it's the least important thing for me is not because I'm rich, I'm certainly not. It's because the most expensive pot of paint and the cheapest pot of paint, the difference between the two isn't huge. It's enough for me, and it won't vary for you, but it's enough for me that even if one pot is more expensive, if I prefer the paint, I'll go for the more expensive one. We've not reached the stage yet where we're talking a difference between £3 and £10 in UK money for a pot of paint, and then maybe I would change my mind. Now, I'm basing that very much on standard acrylic paints and pots, and I know pot size varies a little bit as well. Pro acrylic you get a little bit more. Do you think coach you get a little bit less than some of the others? But the average tends to be around that 18 mil mark, plus or minus a couple of mils there, which doesn't really add up to much. Where there is a difference is some of the hobby products. So a pot of Sterling Mud from Games Workshop versus a pot of Dark Earth from Vallejo or from AK. They both have their own paste mud basing effect that's got the same name. Hugely different because you get so much more in the AK and the Vallejo version. So that's where money would lead me towards those brands. And then I discover that they do so many more different colors. So I'm very, very unlikely to use a Citadel pot of basing texture now because I think there's better value stuff out there. But on the whole, price doesn't come into it because a standard pot of acrylic paint really is around the cost of a standard price of acrylic paint. And I know there'll be people in the comments that will say, no, it's not, it's £1 more, that's 25%, 50%, whatever more. I get it, we're all different, but for me, the price doesn't vary that much that it'll put me off buying something I really, really like or really want. And that's it really. Those are the 6 main considerations that I have when it comes to choosing a range of paints. And there's a real mix. There's nothing there that's groundbreaking, nothing there that should surprise you at all. But I know a lot of you ask me questions about why I'm using certain paints and what's my favorite. The answer is my favorite will change. And at the moment, I love Too Thin Coats, and I'm enjoying a lot of AK products, for especially their basing textures and their powders and their enamels and oils and things. But I also love a few things from other ranges. So I'll always like different products, and I could record this video again in 4 or 5 years, and I'll be talking about new favorite ranges. So you've got to be flexible and change with the times and go with the new thing that you like. And that's the most important thing. And if I'm holding up paints on my tutorials, you don't have to pick that same brand. You can look for alternatives. Don't get too lost in the weeds of always picking the exact same paint range and exact same color. There'll be things that I will say, this is just fantastic, you've got to try it and get hold of it, but at the end of the day, you've got to be happy with it. It's got to be available to you, and the most important part of painting is what you do with that paint rather than the actual brand itself. So all I want you to do now is pop below in the comments what your favorite paint range is ever. Maybe it's gone, maybe it doesn't exist anymore, and what your favorite paint is ever. Maybe it's something I've not tried and I will be inspired to go and pick it up myself and give it a go. So I'm really open to your recommendations. If you have enjoyed the video today, do give it a like as well as that comment. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. If you'd like to support me and the channel even more, please do check out the the links in the video description, and most importantly my Patreon, because that really is the way that I can keep making videos and keep making content like this, which hopefully is helpful to you. Also check out the channel sponsor, Counter Attack Bases. But thank you very much for watching, take care, and I'll catch you soon.